What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we got a reaction to Asia and their self-titled album. Brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter, and patron of the channel, Trucker Kev. Thank you, Trucker Kev. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons who make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out that Patreon link below, the Patreon link on the end screen. I say it in every video, but it's true. We could not do it without the patrons. This channel takes an enormous amount of work, and patrons like Kev make it happen. All right, Kev knows a ton about music. He obviously chose this album because he loves it. I'll let him give some breakdown, then I'll give you some stuff. He said, Asia, a supergroup made up of a very progressive group of musicians. Lead vocalist guitarist John Wetton, who came from King Crimson. The great Steve Howe, who for many, many years was the original founder of Yes. Sitting at the kit, the great Carl Palmer, Yes, of the prog rock legends Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. Also keyboardist Jeff Downs, best known for his work with the Buggles in the first video ever played on MTV Video Killed the Radio Star. Later on, also being a part of Yes and a whole lot more. Well, later on, there'd be some revolving members. This would be considered the lineup for the band. Yeah, they only made it 2 albums before, people started leaving. The MTV era in full swing, they came up with some fantastic videos that just lit up the screen. Leading off the album, of course, with the great Heat of the Moment, a fantastic FM rocker that was heard all over, still to this day. And of course, the synthesized, almost classical beginning of Only Time Will Tell, an MTV staple for many, many years. Basically, all of side 1 is fantastic, and side 2 is no slouch when it comes to killer and not filler, in my opinion. This is another one I've listened to for years and years. Never tire of when I pull it out. I go start to finish, and as typical Trucker Kev goes, there are no favorites. I like them all. I'll go ahead and give you his rating. I do have a very high rating of this one. It's solid 9.0. It's just a fantastic album. The songwriting, the musicianship, the production, while it's not really considered a full-blown progressive rock album, I'll talk about that in a minute. It's also considered prog, hard rock, art rock, and parts pop rock because it did have a couple of songs on the top 40 charts. So basically across many genres, appealed to many folks of all different kinds of likes of music, and it did very, very well its first year. In fact, it lodged itself at #1 for quite some time on the album charts, actually for 9 weeks. It also features great artwork on the album from the legendary Roger Dean, best known for his classic Yes album covers and more. Follow-up album, 1983, followed the same pattern, Alpha. The same lineup, and it's just as great. Maybe someday I will Patreon the whole album. Who knows? I've done more than one from an artist before. All right, great write-up by Kev. I'll give you a little bit. I already talked about it. Debut studio album in 1982. According to both Billboard and Cashbox. Now, Cashbox was a charts that were been around since the 50s. They were kind of thought of not on par with Billboard, but pretty close. And for a lot of years, it was on par. This was the #1 album of the year in 1982 on both Billboard and Cashbox. That shows you how successful it was. Contains, of course, their biggest hit, Heat of the Moment, with Kev, which Kev referenced, which reached #4 in the U.S. This album went to #1 in Canada, 11 in the UK, and I found it is number 95 on the all-time Billboard chart. Like top 100 on the all-time chart. That's insane. Some notes on the album. Howe said, this production was a bit Journey-esque. That was down to Mike Stone, who'd co-produced Escape, which was a huge album for Journey. But Heat of the Moment was the last song recorded for the Asia album. But then we'd already done stuff like Time Again and Wildest Dreams, which are very progressive. There's also the sweetness and Only Time Will Tell. But as soon as I stacked up the guitar and John started singing, we knew we had something special in Heat of the Moment. People said, no, that's not going to work. It's all keyboards now. It's synthesizers. I think Flock of Seagulls was #1. Also a great band that Kev brought a song reaction to years and years ago. Wetton commented, actually what we did was make a sound that blew synthesizers out of the water. Everyone said, oh, no, no, no. A prog guitar band ain't going to work. But it did. I mentioned earlier, this went to #1 in the U.S., spent 9 weeks at the top of the Billboard charts. I've got a story on that in a minute, but 4 times platinum in the U.S., that's 4 million, and it has sold over 10 million copies worldwide. In the band's native UK, it did not perform as well. Peaked at #11. So one of those weird things, and the songs didn't do nearly as well either. But, a little story, John Kalodner went to Geffen Records, having hopped over from Atlantic. He found himself, when he did that, a label rich in both cash and ambition. And he'd already been talking to Wetton since 1976, trying to tell him, you can do more than this and that. So when he gets to Geffen Records, David Geffen had just started. He'd only brought out 2 albums before this, right? So they were literally the 3rd album. So they had a lot of money. They had a lot of backing. With a deal in place, Asia met several big-name producers, but it was Kalodner who suggested Mike Stone as producer. Having cut his teeth in a background capacity on albums by Genesis and Queen, A year earlier, the Englishman had shared the board, as we talked about, with Kevin Ellison on Journey's album Escape, featuring the now, of course, infamous and famous Don't Stop Believing. Downs said Mike Stone was a perfect producer for Asia. The music was on our side of the glass, so to speak, but Mike made us sound 10 times better than we had dared to imagine. He really understood what we were doing. Now, here's an interesting story. Asia spent 3 weeks at #1, and then they were knocked from the top by Paul McCartney's Tug of War. Carl Palmer said this. He said, "We asked David Geffen, how do we get back up there? And he replied, I can do that for you." Carl Palmer said, "I will leave the rest to your imagination. Those were very different times." We won't get into how charts were manipulated and all that good stuff, but let's say they've returned for 6 more weeks and spent 9 weeks at #1. So if you haven't joined us before, the music will not be in the video, but it'll be at a Vimeo link below. Click on that and follow along with us. Let's get to the album opener. And quite the album opener it is, written by John Wetton and Jeff Downs, as they do on all these, but I'm going to tell you who wrote on. The lead single, Wetton said, he's singing it, of course, "The lyrics are an abject apology for my dreadful behavior towards a particular woman, the woman I would eventually marry, but divorced 10 years later. The chorus began its life as a 6/8 country song, but when Jeff and I started writing together, we moved the time signatures around, and Heat of the Moment emerged. No one else particularly got the song, and it was the last song recorded for the album. This was the case with the next 2 albums, that the last song recorded was to be the first single. I think it's because Jeff and I are very, very focused by the end of recording. Of course, those 2 songs were Don't Cry and Go. And of course, John Callender, who I've already talked about, asked the band for a single. So like he heard the album. This happens all the time, like in music lore, right? You go back, and the song that was a big hit wasn't on there originally, but he said, Wetton had an idea for the chorus and Downs had an idea that made the verse, and they wrote the song in an afternoon. The line, "You catch a pearl and ride the dragon's wings," was inspired by Roger Dean's artwork for the album that Kev already referenced. Howe overdubbed the Gibson Les Paul Jr., playing the rhythm guitar power chords in the verses 7 times, each through a different amp to get the grungy sound he wanted. During the song's middle 8, he doubled Downs' synth lick with a koto, which I don't even know what that is. Reached #4 in both the Canadian singles chart and the US chart, as I talked about earlier. Climbed to the top position on the US Billboard mainstream rock chart, achieving 6 weeks at #1. Only went to 46 in the UK. I don't know how. So I definitely know the first 2 songs, right? The first 3 songs are the singles. I definitely know the first 2 songs. I don't know if I know the third one. This song right here is an absolute banger. I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, Kev. Heat of the Moment. It is so well produced. Like everything on it is so well done. I mean, I think it's one of the best songs of the 80s. I mean, I think no doubt it's one of the best songs. It's I go back and listen to it now. It's flawless, man. It really is. Like all of it, the guitar work, the vocals, and it almost feels like it's sped up a little bit, right? It almost feels, it's not, but like, I think that gives it that almost manic pace that you really just get into the song. Now, I didn't talk about it because the critics were not kind to this album or to Asia. And some fans weren't. Obviously, they had great success, but you know, people who wanted the prog rock and didn't feel like they got it. You got a little bit of the prog rock here in the instrumental in the middle of it, you know, but it was more, you know, mainstream. They still kept to their roots, but it's a fantastic song. A koto, I'm going to put up a picture of it right here. It is a Japanese instrument that is the national instrument of Japan. So if you're from that heritage, you're like, dude, how could you not know what this is? Sorry, man, I have never heard of it, but I mean, what a way to start the album, right? Next up, we have the other song that I know for sure. Only Time Will Tell, also from Wetton and Downs. Second single, only went to 17 in the US, which surprised me. 54 in the UK. John Wetton said, "It's fairly self-explanatory. It's my lyrics again, a very personal one about the end of a relationship, and it's my verse, Jeff's chorus. Heat of the Moment is the other way around, if you remember. I've been stockpiling songs during the lead up to Asia, and a lot of my lyrics were about personal experiences. Joni Mitchell's one of my all-time heroes, and she is the undisputed queen of the confessional." Look, that song is fantastic too. Right now, I was 10 years old when this album came out. I turned 11 in the summer of, in August of 82. So this brings me back to a time and place, man. I haven't heard these songs in forever, like since the 80s, right? Since the mid 80s. So it just brings me back to a time and place, right? It's fantastic. And really good songwriter on this. You're leaving now. It's in your eyes. There's no disguising it. It really comes as no surprise to find that you planned it all along. I mean, that's the worst part, right? Not only are you leaving, but you kind of had this in your mind the whole time. So it was all a lie. I see it now. It comes so clear. Your insincerity and me all starry-eyed. You think I would have known by now. So he believed everything she said, even though she was leaving. And I mean, maybe you've been in that boat or known someone. I had a guy that I knew in high school and college who his girlfriend was playing him the whole time. We all tried to tell him. We'd all seen her out with other guys. He'd never believe it, right? It's until you see it yourself. And then the chorus, now sure as the sun will cross the sky, this lie is over. Lost like the tears that used to tide me over. It's produced so well. The harmonies, all the instrumentation is so crisp. It's just fantastic. What a great way to start the album out. Now we get to Soul Survivor. It was the third single. It went to 91 in the UK. It didn't even chart in the US. So I doubt that I know this one, but maybe I do. Also written by Wetton and Downs. Soul Survivor. I would say this song definitely dives in to their proggy roots. You know, they did talk about a lot in interviews. I read a lot about this album just because, I mean, it takes me back and I don't really know anything about it. I mean, I knew the two songs. They talked a lot about wanting to stay true to their prog roots, but make the song shorter and not just go on those long runs. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. It's under 5 minutes, but it's got a lot of prog elements to it. The protagonist in the song is going through some tough times, but he manages to pull up and pull himself out of it. And he is the soul survivor. I mean, that's what it's talking about. So a lot of good elements of prog. A good song because it has, a more proggy feel. I don't like it as much as I like the first two songs. But let's be honest. I heard the first two songs a ton of times, and they bring back nostalgia and there's great memories in my life. Not that my childhood was great, as most of us weren't, but, just that time of having the whole world in front of you, right? And as we get older, we kind of pine for those times sometimes a little more. So it's not really a fair fight. I mean, if I just listened to all three of these in a row, maybe I'd like Soul Survivor as much. Next up, we have Wetton and Steve Howe this time writing it, One Step Closer. One Step Closer. These are very catchy, right? And Jeff Downs' work on the synthesizers is fantastic on all these songs. He adds the texture to it to really make them pop. Obviously, the guitar work is great. And the vocals, I'm a huge fan of the vocals. Huge fan of the vocals on all of these songs. This song, he's pining away for this girl, right? Does she even know he exists? But every step he takes, whether he looks at her, whether he tries to say a word to her, it's one step closer to them being together. But a nice song. All right, we're going to finish out side one with Time Again. Credited to all four of them as songwriters. Carl Palmer gets his first little taste of songwriting royalties here. All right, Time Again. Definitely prog rock roots on this one for sure. Great guitar work on it. The riff at the start, like for the first minute and a half, almost sounded like Barracuda from Heart. That's kind of what I heard in that. And once again, somebody's wronged him, right? Fate looks certain, but then nothing's guaranteed. Want for nothing, but is nothing what you need. Always pushing through, you're never satisfied. I did believe you till I found out that you, lied time and time again. For what I give you, I get nothing in return. Can't forgive you watching all your bridges burn. All day long, I sat and watched you do it wrong. Have to say, that's how you did it all along. So this song's got some fire lyrics, right? Fire lyrics. So once again, as we finish side one, I mean, the musicianship on this album is, high bar. And side one is excellent. So let's move to side two. And we got Wildest Dreams, written by Wetton and Downs. Our Wildest Dreams. Carl Palmer's drumming on here is what stood out for me musicianship-wise. I mean, it's just tight. Like, all of it was great. But this one comes with fire, right? Not the other ones didn't. I mean, come with all this relationship and broken relationship. Now we're coming to war, right? He talks about at the start how the generals are the ones that everybody knows, and they don't even do the fighting, right? The great majority of the time. But like, those are the people that everyone knows and held up as heroes, but they're not the ones doing all the work. And I like the first pre-chorus. Insanity has found its way to TV screens. Vision seems impossible to me. They fight for king, for country. And I never would have thought this in my wildest dreams, right? It just gets so crazy. We see the soldiers moving on to victory and children trampled under marching feet. They fight for king and country. How many millions will they put to sleep? So this song is, it's bringing it, man. This is fire on the lyrics. Next up, we got Wetton and Howe writing Without You. All right, Without You. Carl Palmer's drumming again, Steve Howe's guitar, Downs on those keyboards. I mean, Wetton on the bass, you don't really hear a lot throughout these, even though he wrote every single song, right, with co-writers. So really well done. I mean, I think besides the first two songs, I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll get into this at the end. But besides the first two songs, most of these songs definitely have prog elements. I would define them as prog songs. They're just not long songs. All right, we got two tracks left. We got Cutting It Fine. Wetton, Downs, and Howe on songwriting on this one. All right, Cutting It Fine. Nice little 2-minute coda there at the end, just showcasing things. As always, the musicianship was great. I mean, that's another person who was, this girl wasn't doing things the right way. She's cutting it fine. Never heard her put that way, but Good song. I think the weakest song on the album, but I mean, the songs on this album are strong, so that's not really a diss. Let's finish it off. We got Here Comes the Feeling with Wettin' and How penning this one. All right, Here Comes the Feeling. The feeling of when you've been with someone, right, and you broke up, and then years later you get back with them, and that's what he's describing there, that feeling. It takes him right back, and all his troubles are gone. Great harmonies on here. Musicianship just runs and runs, man. Just fantastic on the musicianship. So with that, let's get into my favorite tracks, and they're going to be dominated by side one. Time Again, honorable mention. Soul Survivor, honorable mention. And my favorites, I mean, they're skewed, right? It's going to be heat of the moment. Only time will tell. I know those songs so well. I do think they're the best two songs on here, but I've only ever heard the other songs once, right? So how can I really judge that? But that's where I'm at. I got to do it. So that's where I am. And now we'll get to my overall score on the album. Well, side one is really strong. Side two, not quite as strong. Still good, though. I think the first two songs, Heat of the Moment, Only Time Will Tell, way less prog. I think the rest of the songs definitely have more prog elements than anything else, but not in a bad way. Like you guys know if you watch this channel, I'm hot and cold on prog, right? I thought they took the best parts of prog and what the parts that I can't really stand behind, right? We shorten these things up, but still had all the best elements of it. The musicianship obviously is like on another level. Like everybody is so good, right? Carl Palmer on the drumming, Jeff Downs on the keyboards. I know some people listen to this and go, it sounds dated with the keys. I don't think it sounds dated with the keys. I think there's a certain sound in the 80s that sounds dated with the keys. I don't think this is it. But, you know, Hal on the guitar are fantastic. And John Wettin, man, the bass, it doesn't really shine through a lot because it's not going to in this music. It's necessary to have there, though. But his vocals are fantastic. And the harmonies, man. These guys come in on the harmonies. That's what really highlights this along with the musicianship for me. They just sound great. So well produced. So well produced. So on first listen to this, I'm going to be at an 8.25. I don't know how you could be much lower than that, just on the quality of musicianship. But I don't know what you think of this one. What are your favorites? What else should I check out from Asia? I definitely know Don't Cry, the lead single of the next album. I don't know any of the other of the next album, but I mean, fantastic musicianship. So let me know favorite tracks on here. What do you think of this album? Thanks to Trucker Kev for bringing this one, taking me back down memory lane, at least with those first two tracks, man. And until next time, guys, I will see you.